Newcastle officials are in Milan to complete the signing of AC Milan midfielder Sandro Tonali in a deal worth £55 million.
Good evening and welcome to the Transfer Show. Mark McAdam and James Savundra are with us to bring us up to date on the day's top news.
Yeah, a lot of news to get through today as well, including Arsenal face competition from treble winners Man City for their #1 target.
But a move for Kai Havertz is edging closer. He'll have a medical this weekend.
But we're going to start with the story that we mentioned right at the start of the show, and that is Newcastle in their pursuit of AC Milan midfielder Sandro Tonali. Mark, I'm going to come to you first because a lot of Newcastle fans getting very excited about this deal. I think we've seen pictures of representatives in Milan. How close is this to getting over the line, do you think?
Close, but not completed just yet. We know that there's been dialogue between AC Milan and Newcastle over the last 48 hours as things have intensified with regards to their pursuit of Sandro Tonali. I know Newcastle fans are desperate for us to say this is deal agreed, but we're not quite at that stage yet. They're just in the final throes of the intricate details of this contract because it's a huge deal, isn't it, for both Newcastle and AC Milan. They're losing probably their prized asset, their key man, their main midfielder and one of the best standout players in Serie A last season. And it's going to be, as you said at the top of the show, a package worth £55 million. So it's a significant outlay for Newcastle as well when they're right up against FFP. But yeah, this is a deal that is getting close. He's captaining the Italy under-21s tonight against Romania. So Sandro Tonali, Newcastle fans, if you can find the game somewhere, you get the opportunity to watch your new man. And I think that gives you an indication as to the type of character he is. The fact that he's a captain for Italy under-21s, he's played for the senior side as well, shows you just what type of a player that Eddie Howe and Newcastle are so close to getting. Of course, as soon as we know, we'll let you know. But yeah, we're just waiting to get confirmation on this one. We know that Dan Ashworth and his team are currently in Milan trying to thrash out the finer details of that deal. We know that we've seen pictures of them coming in and out of various buildings as well. So it's just a case of waiting for official confirmation now. You can see there one of his backroom team and Dan Ashworth has spotted as well coming out of that same hotel with the agent of Sandro Tonali. And I can only describe this as a massive coup for Newcastle and a huge deal, and what a player they're getting.
What does that mean then for Newcastle in their pursuit of James Maddison? Is Tonali very much their priority right now?
Well, Newcastle remain interested in signing Maddison, but doing a deal for him may prove problematic if indeed they do close out that deal with Sandro Tonali, which we expect to take place soon. Leicester City, we're told, demanding around £50 million for James Maddison, and currently Newcastle couldn't buy Tonali and Maddison because of what Mark was saying before when it comes to financial fair play guidelines with what Maddison and his asking price is at the moment. So currently Newcastle are out of contention, but they've not ruled themselves out completely. This could change based on two factors. A, Leicester drastically reducing their asking price for James Maddison. That could happen. We're only in June. When it comes to the end of August and Maddison hasn't been sold yet, then that asking fee of £50 million could come down somewhat. Another way that Newcastle could finance the deal is if Eddie Howe lets go a couple of players, so they could afford something close to £50 million. Maddison, 1 year left on his contract. One thing this does mean, with Tonali potentially moving to Newcastle, Spurs move into the box seat. However, there is a distance in the valuation that Leicester have of him, around £50 million at least, and what Spurs are willing to pay at this moment in time.
There's so many intricacies with regards to the James Maddison deal, because what you've seen from Daniel Levy and Tottenham is they won't overpay for a player. So if Leicester City say we want 50 rising to £60 million, you can rest assured that Daniel Levy won't want to pay the asking price. He want to get a good deal. That's something he's historically always done. The other problem is, of course, wages, because James Maddison is on big wages at Leicester City. He was part of that group that were very well paid off the back of winning the Premier League, and the club was trying to go in and mix it with the big boys, and that meant paying big wages as well. And the other thing to bear in mind is that Newcastle had 2 rejected offers for James Maddison back in January. There was an initial offer that was knocked back by Leicester. The second offer was knocked back by Leicester. So whilst there is interest, it doesn't necessarily mean that Newcastle will continue that pursuit. I think they're interested, but only at the right price.
We've talked about a lot of midfielders and Newcastle, Mark. If they're not going to get Maddison, it would imply that there is still a bit of cash to spend even after the Tonali deal. So do they have other targets, other areas of the pitch?
They have other targets. There are other players that Eddie Howe would love to bring to the football club. He's mentioned it, I think, in every single press conference at the back end of the campaign. One of the big factors with regards to Newcastle over the course of this summer is FFP. Now, Eddie Howe has created a Champions League side from a team that was virtually about to get relegated. So therefore, the club has to catch up commercially. So eyes really are now on Dan Ashworth and the commercial department, because Dan has got to be clever with the finances. They've got to work within the boundaries of FFP, and the commercial team have got to try and drive revenue into that football club, because the more money they make, the more sponsorship deals they do, the more opportunity that Eddie Howe will have to strengthen the side. But you have to have that money coming in before you can start spending it. They are right up against it with regards to FFP. Eddie has mentioned that on so many occasions, so they are going to have to be creative. I don't think they'll be the big players that people expect in the window. They will quietly go about their business. You look at the recruitment that they've done since Eddie went into the football club. They haven't signed the big blockbuster names. They did with Bruno Guimaraes or Ishak, but you look at some of the other players that they've got in, Kieran Trippier, Dan Burn, Matt Targett. These are players that have just slipped under the radar and been hugely effective. But when you look at Newcastle, right back potentially could be an area they'd look to strengthen, possibly left back as well, maybe in the middle of defence, possibly in an advanced position. So Eddie Howe will probably have a shopping list that's that big, and it will get squeezed like that by the sporting director, Dan Ashworth.
The exciting one seems to be Tonali then, and it seems from the outside this is a real statement signing, as Mark was alluding to earlier.
It is. Newcastle have made some brilliant signings in recent time. Bruno Guimaraes is one you take from the top calibre, but this is now Newcastle dining at the top table, signing players from the very top clubs. We've not seen this before for Newcastle since maybe signing Michael Owen from Real Madrid back in 2005. He really fits the bill for Newcastle. In January, we spoke about how a priority for them was getting a holding midfielder. They had a number of different players in midfield, but it meant that Bruno Guimaraes was having to play in his holding role. He's much better playing further forward. He filled the role admirably in his time this season. Newcastle finishing in the Champions League spots. But Tonali is a man that I think is seen as more a priority for them than getting an attacking midfielder like James Maddison. They have other players in that position. They only signed Anthony Gordon for around £40 million in January. So they've already got that area well serviced. This is somebody they needed, especially with John Joe Shelby leaving last season. It's a gap in the squad they've now filled. But as Mark was saying there's plenty of areas they need to strengthen, because now they're playing midweek in the Champions League as well as fighting in the top four in the Premier League.
Let's talk Arsenal now, and Kai Havertz, a deal worth reportedly £65 million. And Mark, an update in the last hour on that?
Yeah, we're hearing this one is progressing nicely. Arsenal fans will be excited about this deal. And Kai Havertz will be having his medical, not in the UK because of commitments elsewhere, this weekend in Europe, ahead of potentially confirming the deal next week between Chelsea and Arsenal as well. So it's clear Arsenal want to splash the cash. Mikel Arteta and Edu are busy once again. They've identified targets that they wanted. And I think it's safe to say this came as a little bit of a surprise to most people, because you don't see big players often move between big Premier League sides. But this is clearly a player that they've identified at the Emirates, that he could improve this squad. He could be a key member for us.
It worked well last year with Jesus, Zinchenko. Exactly.
Now, the good thing about someone like Kai Havertz, he's Premier League ready. You know, there's no bedding in period, there's no understanding the league, there's no moving to a new country. They don't need to, sort of settle him in. He can literally live at home, travel up to Arsenal and hit the ground running. And I think that's one of the attractive things about this. Amazingly for Chelsea as well, they're going to get somewhere in the region of what they paid for him 3 years ago. So they'll be looking at the deal thinking, well, this suits us as well, because we've had 3 years out of a player. We're selling him for the same money that we bought him for, which would fit nicely into their FFP year as well. So it will just go to counteract some of the spending from January and last summer. So it suits them. And clearly Arsenal are getting a player that they are very keen on.
But only 7 goals in the Premier League last season. What do you think Mikel sees in him? Where do you think he wants him to play in that Arsenal team?
Well, this is fascinating actually as well, because there is a really interesting article on The Athletic with regards to Kai Havertz, and they're suggesting that they see him more as a number 8, which goes back to his Bayer Leverkusen days. He played that role a great deal there before joining Chelsea. His expected goals this season was 10.8. He got 6. So therefore, he underperformed his XG. And it's really fascinating to see this article and the way they're looking at him and the position he potentially could play to replace Granit Xhaka in that Arsenal midfield. And they go on and talk about his legacy at Chelsea. Whilst he shined in the big moments, the Champions League final or the Club World Cup, he's flattered to deceive at times and hasn't been as effective in the Premier League week in, week out, which is something that Chelsea would have expected when they signed him. But he's still young enough to improve. And we'll speak about it later on in the show, but I think there's a number of players that have come over to the Premier League, hasn't quite worked out at one club, but they've moved on to another club and shone. And potentially you could see Kai Havertz doing something very similar.
Yeah, now talking about Premier League ready and talking about players that Arsenal are keen on leads you to one name in particular, James, Declan Rice. Any update on this?
Well, today, big update. We've been reporting that 2 big offers were expected to go in today to West Ham for Declan Rice. Now, last week we told you that Manchester City were monitoring the situation around Rice, but now we understand they are very much interested. That interest is concrete, and they could be one of the clubs making one of those 2 big offers today. We know Arsenal have already made 2 offers, the last one totalling £90 million. That was rejected by West Ham. Negotiations continue between Arsenal and West Ham. We could have a third player involved as well. Manchester United, they have an interest in Declan Rice. Why wouldn't you? What a fascinating, incredible player, talent he is, brilliant player, great personality. But it's whether they can structure the deal and find a way of sanctioning a deal like that, spending that sort of money when you've got all that's going on with the takeover at the moment. And United have so many different priorities at the moment. Midfield probably isn't top of that at the moment. Signing a striker, maybe 2 strikers, is. So we could have Manchester City, Manchester United and Arsenal all going for one player. A bidding war, and that means one thing. The price is going to go up and up and up. £90 million, that was a bid that was rejected. Sky Italy reporting that City are tabling a bid of £75 million plus £15 million in add-ons, similar to Arsenal's bid. But we understand with this Manchester City bid, the bonuses, the add-ons are more realistic and likely to be paid in the next 2 years rather than what Arsenal initially tabled.
Mark, how big a blow would it be for Arsenal if they did miss out on Declan Rice? And do you think they will feel like they could have done something differently?
He's their number one target. He's the player that Edu and Mikel Arteta have identified as being the one that could take that Arsenal team forward through the middle of the park. Now, you always feel like you want to get a bargain. You want to pay as little as possible. But this always felt like a deal that was £100 million plus. David Sullivan had said publicly after the Europa Conference League final, we think that Declan has played his final game for us. He, deserves the opportunity to move on. He signed a new contract. He'd been offered big contracts by West Ham. He wanted to sort of play things out and see how, see how things developed and the opportunities that arose. No question about his ability. I watched him play for England on Monday night at Old Trafford and in Malta on Friday night. Once again, standout performances. He played as a double pivot with Jordan Henderson in the middle of the park, looked superb. He was huge for West Ham last season. And I think everyone at West Ham will look at this situation and they'll feel like he deserves his opportunity to play in the Champions League, to play at the highest possible level. And he'll go with their blessing. He would be a big miss, though, and there's no question about that.
Though, isn't it? The bidding war. This is exactly what they wanted. So how high could we see his valuation go, particularly with the clubs that are involved now?
I think the nature of what's happening and how quickly things have progressed from Arsenal's initial offer to their second offer being rejected and now Manchester City potentially being at the table, I think we could see a resolution quite quickly now. Yeah. I don't think this will go on and on and on. We've got to a point now where Arsenal are clearly getting close to where West Ham want to be. I think it's probably going to be around 100 million plus 10, 15, 20 million in add-ons. That's going to get the deal done. And if Manchester City feel that they can get that deal done, they'll get it done, and then it will be up to Arsenal whether they match it or not. I don't think Manchester United can quite get to the table with those kind of figures at this stage. But he's got 2 years left on his contract. West Ham hold the cards. And interestingly, Declan has his heart set on Arsenal. Staying in London and going to Arsenal is what he envisaged happening this summer. But Manchester City, treble winners, Pep Guardiola, that team is going to surely turn his head. Massive deal as well, because not only have you got to pay 100 plus for the player, you've got agency fees and wages. So it's a £200 million plus package that's going to be on the table.
He's worth it?
I think so. I think he's superb. And I think he's the future of England in the middle of the park. I think he's a key player in the Premier League. He's only young, bags of potential ahead of him. Imagine getting into a team with Pep Guardiola or Mikel Arteta, 2 managers that want to improve you as a player, want to work with you on the grass as well. Yeah, and I think this could be one of the standout deals, and there'll be a number of clubs that look at this and think, well, we should have been at the table.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Let's break there. Coming up next, the latest on Manchester United's pursuit of Mason Mount. Plus, another Manchester United target is Bundesliga bound.
Discrimination. Let's kick it out.
Welcome back to the Transfer Show. We've already talked about Manchester United being interested in one English midfielder. Let's move on to another, Mark, because Mason Mount, there's clearly interest in him. What can you tell us, the latest?
Yes, a player that Eric Ten Hag is very much interested in, just into the last year off his current Chelsea deal. And Manchester United have had 2 rejected bids so far in this summer transfer window. The second believed to be around £50 million as a total package. Manchester United, though, are expected to go in with a third bid. They are keen on the player, but they're also monitoring other midfielders as well. So it doesn't mean that Mason Mount's the only midfielder that they're interested in. Chelsea want, we believe, around £65 million, which is obviously a significant fee for a player that's come through the Chelsea academy, he's come through the setup there, and at one stage looked to be the future at Stamford Bridge. Someone that was a regular fixture under Frank Lampard, someone that had gone out on loan in the EFL as well at Derby and been superb. He's worked his way into the England setup and has been a big fixture for Gareth Southgate. So you can understand why a club like Manchester United are interested in someone with Mason's ability. At the minute, though, it's just a case of we're holding and waiting for that third offer. And if that can get closer to what Chelsea want, then you'd imagine Mason Mount to be a Manchester United player by the end of the window.
Mason had made it clear as well that he wants to leave Chelsea. We know he's a Chelsea boy through and through. What do you think his main reasons are for wanting to leave Stamford Bridge?
I think there's been real frustration over the last year or so when it comes to these contract talks. I think if we had this conversation a year ago, Mason Mount would have said, I'd happily spend the rest of my career at Chelsea. But these talks simply haven't gone as well as Mount and his camp would have hoped. He wants to be paid, and he'll feel rightly so, many fans will feel the same, paid a similar amount to the highest earners at Chelsea, considering what he's already done at his time at the club already. But that's simply not been the case. Chelsea's valuation and what their offer is in terms of money is very different from what Mount and his camp are after. And so we saw the scenes at the end of the season, Mount looking to wave away the fans. He sort of took it in for one last time as he walked out onto the pitch. I think now he is ready for another challenge. I think this could be a marriage made in heaven, really, when you look at what Manchester United have been lacking this season. They did so well bringing Casemiro and Eriksen, 2 supreme operators for them this season. When they were missing, Casemiro through the lengthy suspensions he had, Eriksen out between January and April with an injury, United really, really suffered. Eriksen has done brilliantly for United, but Mount offers similar to what Eriksen does, but offers more legs, both going forward and defensively as well. And we need to bear in mind the sort of player we're talking about here. I think we need to wipe away what happened last season. He had a number of injuries. Things didn't work out for Chelsea for whatever reason, the managerial situation, the turnover of players. But the season before last, 10 goals and more than 10 Premier League assists as well. If he does sign for Manchester United, they're getting a proven performer, someone who's won plenty of things, a great character, and he could fit perfectly into that Manchester United team. There are other priorities. They need to sort out their goalkeeping situation. They desperately need a striker. But they can start this window and sign a player like Mason Mount in June or July, then that's a really good start for them. Because I think Manchester United fans are getting quite frustrated. I think this is the summer they looked at. Yes, we did brilliantly last season. That's what Erik ten Hag and the fans will be saying. But they need to build next season. At the moment, all the early signs are that they aren't going to be targeting the likes of Harry Kane this season. But if they can bring in a player like Mason Mount, that will keep the fans at bay for a while, especially with all that's going on with the takeover at the moment as well.
It's a real shame as well, I think, with regards to Mauricio Pochettino has a record for developing and working with young players and improving them. He's a proper coach, not just a manager, but someone that can go and influence players and enhance their game. And you almost feel like if Mason had the opportunity to work with Mauricio Pochettino, he would make him a better player.
Maybe even a player like Kai Havertz as well.
Yeah.
He's going to be thinking the same thing.
Possibly, although he'll probably feel his time is better suited elsewhere and he'll get that same coaching at Arsenal. But Mason is the darling of Chelsea and he's been there. You know, he's everything that you want from a midfielder, from a player. He's come through the setup, he's a part of the academy, he supports the club, he's been in and around it for so many years. So it's a bit of a shame. It feels like the end of an era when you look at that. Roman Abramovich invested so much money in that academy, the best coaches, the best facilities, to develop players like Mason Mount. And now for him to leave would almost go against the grain of what they've been doing for so many years.
Explain this to me then, Mark. Mason Mount to Manchester United, Kai Havertz to Arsenal, Kovacic to Man City. Have you ever known a transfer policy where a team seems to be so willing to improve the teams around them?
Well, I think Chelsea's situation is they have spent in excess of 600 million over January and last summer's transfer windows. The new owners have come into the football club with their plan, their DNA and their philosophy of how they want to do things, which goes against what had been done historically. and therefore they can only sell to clubs that have the money to buy them. You're not seeing these players go into La Liga or Serie A because they don't have the funds to pay what Chelsea want, whereas Manchester City, Arsenal and Manchester United can spend that type of money. And that's where Chelsea, unfortunately, they either have to suffer the consequences and sell to clubs that can't afford to pay what they want, or they have to sell them to rivals. And with FFP being a big factor, particularly off the back of the pandemic that has affected European football, they've only got one option, and that's to sell to other Premier League sides.
So lots of players on their way out at Chelsea, and James, they remain in talks to sign a striker, don't they?
Yes, that's been a massive issue for Chelsea, not just last season, the last few years, goal scoring. I'm not sure whether or not this will be the man to fit the bill for them, but Nicholas Jackson, Chelsea remain in talks with Villarreal around the signing of him. He's a number. They're looking at a number of forwards at the moment. He's one of them, and we're told Chelsea are prepared to pay around €35 million to capture him. They're exploring a structured deal. Villarreal are looking to get most of the money up front, so that's the only disagreement at the moment. That's the only reason why this deal probably hasn't been confirmed quite yet. Personal terms aren't expected to be a problem as well. A young player, ended his La Liga campaign brilliantly, 9 goals in his last 8 matches. And Mark, he's a player that Bournemouth nearly signed in January.
Yeah, they got so close. They might be looking at this situation and thinking, is this the one that got away? And they were so close in the sense that he was in the building and going through the formalities of a medical. Now, Bournemouth agreed a deal with Villarreal, which at the time was around £25 million, so a lot less than what his release clause was, but that was the clever bit of business that Bournemouth had done to get the player in. They knew that when they agreed the deal, he had a hamstring problem. They knew that he wasn't fit and ready to go straight into the team. So what they did was they agreed the deal, brought him over, did the medical, and they did a little bit of extra due diligence on the current situation. They got a couple of reports from various doctors to look at the scans, to look at his hamstring, because they needed to know exactly when he'd be back. Bournemouth at the time were in the bottom 3 of the Premier League and they were struggling, and they were looking to sign players that would keep them in the top flight. So they needed to get every bit of business done, and done properly for players that could improve the squad immediately. And unfortunately for Bournemouth, unfortunately for Nicholas Jackson, the reports that came back suggested he wouldn't be out for just a couple of weeks. It would be 6 to 8 weeks. And of course, by the time Bournemouth signed him in January, and then suddenly, you know, he's not available for February, he's not available for March, he comes back into the team in April, Bournemouth could have been relegated by then. So they couldn't spend £25 million on a player that clearly had a lot of potential and talent that wouldn't go straight into the side, and by the time they got him back fit, it might have been too late. So they had to walk.
Chelsea fans, though.
Sorry?
Will this excite Chelsea fans, do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
This is a player that has huge potential. He's a focal point number 9. He's got the ability to drop into pockets of space and link the play. He's hard-working. He's got great technical ability. He's a good technician. His finishing, as James suggested, has improved at the back end of the season. That may have been one of the question marks. Can he score the number of goals that we need in the Premier League? He certainly proved in La Liga that he can score goals. He was a late developer, really, in terms of European football. Came over from Africa. Villarreal gave him the opportunity, bit of a trial, see how you get on. Then, obviously, hit gold when they realised what they had with him, and then decided to sign him on a long contract. And obviously now have made a huge amount of money on him. But he's versatile. He'll press from the front. He's got all the attributes you need. The only question mark I would say potentially for Chelsea is, does he need another step? Would Bournemouth be the right step into the Premier League and then go to a side like Chelsea? To go from Villarreal to Chelsea, where the pressure is very different, is my only question mark. And I'm going to say this perhaps under my breath, but could he be the next Didier Drogba? Could he be that type of player for Chelsea?
Clip that up.
Don't clip it up. I said to James, I don't know whether I'm going to say that. I'm going to caveat it with, there's a lot of potential there.
Well,
huge
let's
potential.
double check this hamstring first. The Chelsea doctors will need to look at that closely, won't they?
Yeah, but yeah, no question, the one that might have got away for Bournemouth.
OK. But not the only potential incoming for Chelsea. Another exciting name for them, Mark.
Christopher Nkunku. Yeah, it's been confirmed as well. 25-year-old from RB Leipzig, £52 million deal. So another big chunk of cash that's been spent by Chelsea. Started his career at PSG as well, so good pedigree in that regard. Last season scored 23 goals in 36 appearances in all competitions. for RB Leipzig. Someone that comes again with that versatility. You see it with so many players now. They can play in multiple positions. He can play as an 8, he can play as a right winger, he can play as a striker, and therefore that is brilliant for any manager to have. A player with that versatile nature in his squad is fantastic. Athletic, good mentality, good piece of business. I think this is big money, but I think Chelsea might have just hit on something here. They worked efficiently in the window. They've got this deal done nice and early. They've activated the clause. There was not much that RB Leipzig could have done to stop it, and Chelsea have got a player that I will be watching closely over the course of this season, because I think he could be an interesting one. He's 25 as well, so he's not a kid, but he's not too old.
Yeah, OK, Mark, thank you very much. Now, coming up next here on the Transfer Show, Gianluca Di Marzio gives us the view from Italy, and we take a look at Man United's plans for the summer beyond Mason Mount.
Welcome back to the Transfer Show. More on Sandro Tonali on the way. Plus, we take a closer look at the turnover of players at Chelsea since they won the Champions League. But now, and with a view from Italy, let's hear from Gianluca Di Marzio.
Newcastle, with a shocking offer, is in the verge to close the deal for Tonali. Tonali is the Milan midfielder, a symbol of Milan. 70 million euro plus 5 million of bonus to convince Milan, AC Milan, to say yes. AC Milan wants 5 million more. The deal is just agreed with the player for a 6-year contract of 8 million euro plus 2 of bonus. Tonali said yes to Newcastle. So Tonali is going to Newcastle, and Vicario, the Empoli goalkeeper, Guglielmo Vicario, is going to Tottenham. There is an agreement between Tottenham and Empoli, a verbal agreement for 20 million euro plus bonus, and then Vicario will be another Italian goalkeeper in Tottenham after Gollini of the last season. But it's not finished, because from Premier League to Italy can arrive Van de Beek, because Manchester United proposed Van de Beek to AS Roma, to Jose Mourinho. It's not a priority now. The priority of AS Roma is selling player. For example, Cliver to Bournemouth is really close, but AS Roma will think about Van de Beek in the next days, and then we will see if Van de Beek is coming to Italy in these days, while a lot of Italian players are coming to Premier League.
Manchester United mentioned there, then they have a lot to do this summer, don't they? Incomings and outgoings. James, we're expecting more than Mason Mount, of course, who we've already discussed earlier in the show. If they can get that deal done, that is, of course. The big one for Man United and for Man United fans seems to be getting a new number 9.
That seems to be the main priority, and getting a striker potentially puts them out of the market for signing a player like Declan Rice. They cannot simply afford to be spending what looks like £90 million and above on Declan Rice without solving the key issue when it comes to a striker. Marcus Rashford did brilliantly last season with his goal-scoring return, scoring 30 goals or more in all competitions, but he prefers playing on the left flank. Anthony Martial is a player that Erik ten Hag really likes the look of, but he's been at the club now 7 or 8 years, and his injury record has been terrible. I think he's only been available for 25% of the minutes that Manchester United have had this season. They've played a number of games in all competitions as well, so they simply need a striker. Harry Kane felt like the natural fit. You don't get a more proven winner, a more proven goal scorer, somebody who would be a guaranteed fit in that Manchester United squad. But it almost feels like already United have decided, because of Daniel Levy's start, the fact that Tottenham simply at this moment in time simply don't want to sell him to another Premier League club, means they're looking to move on now, and it potentially looks like they're looking at younger targets. So they're making inquiries at the moment about other targets, though it does feel like Kane is the man that they ultimately really want. So whether or not that's something that is revisited later on in the window, we wait to see what Harry Kane's stance is. He's got a well-deserved break now following his international time with England. What he comes back in, what sort of mood he comes back into camp, that could affect things when he goes back to Tottenham. But striker is the priority. Yes, they want a midfielder. Mason Mount could be the man that fits the bill for them. Right back was an area they did look at closely in January, but with Aaron Wan-Bissaka's return to form, that wasn't seen as much of a priority. I think they simply need to get a striker. It could be another really difficult season where Erik ten Hag's having to juggle his troops around and try and find a winning formula, because they just about got over the line this season. I'm not sure they can go into next season with that current squad and still compete as they did this year.
Do you agree, Mark? Do you think United will miss out on Harry Kane?
I think anyone that wants to try and sign Harry Kane over the course of this summer is going to really struggle. They're up against one of the most fierce negotiators in football in Daniel Levy, who has made his stance pretty clear when it comes to Harry Kane over the course of the last couple of windows. Summer windows, certainly. There was that big window where Manchester City put in a couple of tentative offers that were rejected immediately, even though they were around the £100 million mark, and Tottenham wanted close to 150, and no one was prepared to go there. And Harry Kane got his head down, kept scoring goals, kept doing what Harry Kane does. The interesting thing, of course, is he's 30 as well, coming up to being 30. I still think a Harry Kane next summer on a free transfer will be an appealing signing for so many sides, unless he has any issues with injuries this season. But I can't see that happening. I just don't know if there will be someone that will pay the type of money that Tottenham would be tempted to sell. And when you look at the scenario, it's you keep Harry Kane and he scores 30 goals that fires you into the top 4 in the Champions League, which is worth £50-60 million. You sell Harry Kane for £50-60 million and you miss out on the top 4 and you miss out on the Champions League money. So that's the kind of dilemma and the situation that they'll be looking at. But of course, Ange Postecoglou will desperately want Harry Kane because he'll be a massive player. Manchester United, though, like James says, definitely in the market. They've been linked with Rasmus Højlund from Atalanta, who has been interesting a lot of Premier League sides because of his progression from Austria to Serie A. He's got the right type of profile as well for a striker, physically imposing, so he could do that job. So that, yeah, it's just balancing at this stage. And whilst we've done a lot of talking about transfers, how many players have actually moved in this window? You know, McAllister to Liverpool, Brighton have signed 2 or 3, Chelsea 1. A lot of talk, not a lot of action.
You've got a lot of talk to come as well, Mark. So you've got a long way to go, but hopefully a few more signings as well. Let's talk about then, Mark. Let's grant your wish and talk about a deal which is pretty much almost there in Sandro Tonali. Many Newcastle fans may not have seen him play too much. They've probably done the classic, gone on YouTube and seen the highlights, which makes every single player look absolutely incredible. Where do you expect him to fit in? Because you have done a little bit of research into this.
Yeah, I've been looking at this one, and you have to remember as well, I've been lucky enough to look at Eddie Howe's signings from 2008-09 right through to the present day. I've watched up close and personal how he works.
Just explain why, in case anyone doesn't know.
So, yeah, very briefly, I didn't expect you to pose this question, but very briefly, I worked in recruitment and analysis back in 2005, 6, 7, 8 at Bournemouth, and was lucky enough to work with Eddie when he first became the manager on New Year's Eve 2008, and he was charged with keeping Bournemouth in the Football League. So I was a part of his recruitment team, very loosely recruitment team, because they didn't have anyone. So it was basically me working for free and trying to help him out, because I'd worked for the previous manager, Kevin Bond. So first signing Eddie Howe ever made, Jake Thompson on loan from Southampton. He then signed Steve Fletcher from Crawley, who came back to the football club. So ever since those players, I've been looking at what he's done, the way he recruits, the way he coaches, and the things that he does. And it's safe to say the recruitment that he has done since going into Newcastle has been absolutely superb. So I always take a keen eye on the players he likes to sign. He always does a lot of hard work and likes to watch players for a long period of time, not just someone that's currently playing really well at the moment, scoring goals, catching the eye, let's go and sign him. He'll have his plan. He'll be looking at players that he's monitored and watched for some time, and he's really
YouTube highlights. Not
Sorry?
just the YouTube highlights.
Not just the YouTube highlights. And that's something that he's done. And Eddie's perhaps a little bit different than most Premier League managers, because he's got someone who works with him, Andy Howe, who is a part of Dan Ashworth's backroom team, who has worked with him for a number of years, and you'll guess by the surname, is related. So what Eddie has got there is basically a version of himself out in the European football world, watching players relentlessly, scouting every single individual. And you've got someone who identifies and understands exactly what the manager wants. You don't get a more closely working relationship than someone who's a part of your family. And that's not just because of name, but because he's probably one of the best and most kind of looked at young scouts, the future of football. He was involved with so many deals that have happened at Newcastle. And therefore, you'd imagine, I don't know, but I'm presuming he would have been involved with this Tonali deal as well. So you've got in Tonali someone that can play in multiple positions. He can play as a pivot, play as a 6 and sit in front of the back 4, but he can also play as an 8 as well. Technically, he's excellent, very composed on the ball, someone that's an intelligent footballer as well, both in and out of possession. This is the key thing, he's a leader. He's the captain of the Italy under-21s tonight against Romania, and someone that is comfortable with playing in the San Siro with those pressures. Guess what? St James's Park, there comes pressure. You know, the atmosphere, the environment, the Newcastle fans are desperate for players that can handle that, and Tonali can certainly do that. I think he'll work really nicely with Bruno. He's versatile as a midfielder as well. He can slot into different positions, and he is Newcastle's #1 target during this transfer window. So the fact that they've gone out to get their #1 target, and all but being confirmed now, they're so close on the deal, this would be a huge coup, because how many times do you see Newcastle signing the future of Italian football from a club like AC Milan? So, big credit to the recruitment team for what they've done there. They're so close to getting this deal done.
How close?
We're still waiting. I'm looking at my phone. I'm just refreshing it.
Now.
I've got some breaking news, which we'll talk about in the next part. But this is a big deal, and I think this is a huge step forward for Newcastle. We know they're up against it FFP-wise, but yeah, Tonali could be superb.
Keep an eye on that phone. And still to come on the Transfer Show, we'll bring you the rest of today's transfer news. Stay with us.
Together, we can change it.
Welcome back to the Transfer Show, and despite the fact that our reporters are here providing you an update of all of the day's news, they're also doing their day job in finding new stories as well. And Mark McAdam has some breaking news for us concerning a Premier League club.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for Bournemouth fans because you are on the verge of making your first summer signing. We reported last week that the club were in talks with Roma over a deal for Justin Kluivert. And the latest information that's into us in the last few minutes is that he is due in Bournemouth for his medical tomorrow, according to our sources, and that the club has agreed a £9.5 million deal with Roma. So, Justin Kluivert, of course, his father played for Newcastle. He's heading to the Premier League. Big day tomorrow for Bournemouth.
Thank you, Mark. Now, we've touched on Manchester City already, but let's talk Kyle Walker. Now, his current contract at City expires in June 2024. We reported earlier this week that he's happy at City, but Bayern seem to think differently, don't they, James?
Yeah, they do. Yesterday we reported that İlkay Gündoğan has appeared to strike a deal with Barcelona, a 3-year contract he was offered. Man City simply couldn't match that. So it looks like Gündoğan is off to Spain, and one man who we think is going to stay in Manchester is Kyle Walker. Sky Germany are reporting that Bayern Munich are pushing really, really hard to try and sign the England right back, and they're prepared to give him a 2-year deal plus the option of a third as well. Walker, 33 years of age now. City are also in talks with him about a new deal. Contract up next summer. As I said, 33 years of old. They're taking more a pragmatic approach to players over the age of 30. So I think he's probably looking for another year, take him up to 2025. It's his preference to stay at Manchester City, and crucially, they have no desire to sell him either. So despite Bayern Munich really pushing for him, he's a player that Thomas Tuchel likes. It does seem like Kyle Walker will be staying at Manchester City.
OK, which means, Mark, if look, he's still chasing stories. You cannot stop him. That they are still on the lookout for a defender than Bayern Munich. They're not going to get Kyle Walker. It looks like they are going to get a Manchester United target.
Yeah, they're in the box seat for Kim Min-jae, who, of course, was a massive part of Napoli's defensive unit last season, which went on to win Serie A, of course. The 26-year-old South Korea international is in advanced talks to potentially head to Bayern Munich. Now, this one's quite fascinating because there is a bit of a sticky release clause, which, depending on certain conditions, could be worth between 42 and 59 million pounds.
Quite a gap.
There's quite a gap there. There are all sorts of different reasons as to why and what and how. The main thing is that Bayern Munich are willing to pay the release clause, whatever that is, between 42 and 59 million pounds. Interestingly for us, of course, is that he was a Manchester United target as well. They were interested in Kim Min-jae. However, once again, like Declan Rice and Mason Mount, they're just not getting out the blocks quick enough to get these deals done during this summer window. So, yeah, that's the situation with Kim Min-jae. Looks like he's heading to Bayern Munich. However, I will caveat that with, until the deal is signed, anything is possible. I've been in training grounds waiting for players that are heading down the M6 or the M23 or wherever they're coming from to sign for a club. One phone call and suddenly everything changes. Now, of course, Bayern Munich are in an advanced position to get this deal done, but one phone call and everything can change. So Manchester United fans, if they're desperate for a defender, they can get on the phone, get it sorted, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that's the latest one with that.
Back to one of our top stories now, and that is, of course, the future of Declan Rice. And Jacob Steinberg has written for The Guardian saying that he's still keen to join Arsenal, despite the treble winners' interest. Mark, you did say that earlier. Is Arsenal Declan's number one choice?
I said it a couple of weeks ago as well. The information that I was getting at the time was that Declan was really keen on Arsenal. He felt that Mikel Arteta and Edu had shown very early on their intent. The two offers that Arsenal have put in for the West Ham midfielder have both been club records as well, so they're prepared to put their money where their mouth is. He's interested in the project. He was excited by what he saw from Arsenal last season. He's got a young family. He could still stay in London as well and carry on playing for Arsenal. So I think it ticks a lot of boxes. I do think the Pep Guardiola effect, the fact that Manchester City are so dominant at the moment, will play in his thinking. However, to say that Arsenal are his preferred destination would be spot on.
OK. Let's finish the show. Well, it's hard to say, isn't it? I need a break. Let's finish the show by looking at Chelsea, James, because you've been looking into the fact that, you know, they won the Champions League just 2 years ago, and yet there's been so much change since that side.
There has been just over 2 and a bit years since Chelsea had that special night. Thomas Tuchel leading them to Champions League success. 2 years on, we can look at that team from that night, and it's all changed, completely all changed, and it could be almost all changed when you look at it. To go for the goalkeeper, Edouard Mendy on his way to Saudi Arabia. Tony Rudiger left last summer, moving to Real Madrid. Jorginho leaving for Arsenal in January. N'Golo Kante just confirming his move to the Saudi Pro League. Kai Havertz on the verge of Arsenal. Mason Mount, he looks likely to leave Chelsea this summer, potentially for Manchester United. Timo Werner, he left last summer as well for RB Leipzig. When you look at Azpilicueta and Thiago Silva, they're probably most likely to move on next summer. Azpilicueta could potentially move on this summer. So it leaves you with Ben Chilwell and Reece James as the future. You look at two players who probably do have a decent future at Chelsea, and they have been the story so far of this transfer window. They're looking to offload a number of players, especially ahead of June the 30th, because that's a crucial date when it comes to their accounting and fitting within financial fair play. But it just shows you a picture of just how quickly the picture has changed at Chelsea. just a year of these new owners, and we're expecting there to be so much happening there over the next few months.
And there were similar problems, I was just going to say up front back then as well. Timo Werner was criticised week in, week out. I know they won the Champions League final, but those lack of goals was still apparent then, wasn't it?
Still a problem then. And last season, 38 Premier League goals from 38 Premier League games, which isn't what you expect from a side like Chelsea. Whether or not Nkunku and Jackson are going to be the answers to that, we wait to see. Big problem for Mauricio Pochettino, finding the goals.
We wait to see exactly what happens with Chelsea next season, don't we? James, Mark, thank you so much for all of that. The last hour, we packed a lot in, didn't we? But no doubt about the top story today in the world of transfers. It is that man. It is Sandro Tonali. Looks like he's on the cusp of a move to Newcastle. If you've missed it, we'll bring you right up to date next.